Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Girl Next Door podcast. I'm your host, Sean, aka your number one source of fashionably late, but occasionally great pop culture takes. Today, we are talking about the new Harry Styles album, Harry's House. But before we get into it, I just want to let y'all know I stream every single episode of these streams on. That's redundant. I stream every single one of these streams. Hello. Um, I stream every single episode on Twitch at twitch.tv/Girl Next Door podcast. I actually just talked to Extreme about this. I normally do Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, but I've been trying out a new schedule Mondays, Thursday, Friday. That might be what I go with moving forward, but we'll see. I mean, I guess I'll tweet about it. You can follow me at I actually have a couple Twitter accounts. They're going to be in the description of the video, but like on Twitter, it's at @NotSeanOrSean. But there's also Girl Next Door Pod. Again, they're going to be in the description. This is not a very clean intro. This is like my second time trying it, but you know what? Fuck it. Here we go. Hi. Oh my gosh, what a great start. Yeah, like I said, today we are talking about Harry's House. So the amount of times I've called it Harry's Home over the past few weeks leading up to the album release is honestly pretty embarrassing. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's mostly because so I don't know why Raven's Home has been on my brain and like living in there rent free for the past, oh my god, I don't even know how long, but I think that's personally probably why. I keep wanting to call it Harry's house. Harry's Home. It's actually called Harry's House. My brain cells are absolutely fried right now, apparently. But yeah, I've been really excited to cover this. This is my first time on the channel doing like a pseudo review kind of situation. Well, I say pseudo review, but this is like fully going to be a review. Excuse me, sorry. But I just want to like also throw out like this is going to be a review, not a react. I know reacts are like a lot more a lot more poppin' on YouTube, but I don't have the patience to fight with copyright. I just think of all of like the channels that I watch all the time, like Reacts by Ash or Kyoshi Warrior, where they get flagged so often that it takes forever for their videos to come out. A lot of the stuff just ends up being on Patreon instead, which I'm not opposed to starting up a Patreon, but it probably wouldn't be because of like React content. I also don't have a face cam, so I feel like that takes away the fun of like a React stream anyway. So we were just doing a review. I have listened to this album a handful of times well, I say handful, that's kind of underselling it. I knew that when I announced that I wanted to cover this album last Thursday, I was just like, oh shit, well I said it live, I'm gonna really have to commit to it whether I like the album or not. I've done sort of mini album reviews in the past, not like on a channel or anything, but I've definitely never like recorded like a podcast episode for it, so this is a first for me, so excuse me if it's a little bit rough. Still figuring out the format. I'd love to do more of these in the future. I was really tempted to double feature this tonight actually with Harry's House and then like Florence and the Machine's new album. I don't think that's going to be the case tonight, just because I don't know if time-wise it's going to work out, but it's definitely in my back pocket. I will probably talk about it in the near future. Don't quote me on that though, because I'm a fucking liar. And yeah, so I've actually listened to this quite a few times. I've written down sort of all of my, well, I wrote down my first impressions, and I wrote notes for like every other listen that I had after my first listen, just to see if like my opinions on certain songs changed, if I felt better about the album, if I felt less favorable towards the album. stuff like that. I just wanted to track my entire process with having this record for the past weekend. I also tried to space out my listens as well. I'm like guilty of, if I really like an album, of like spamming it back to back to back, or just like playing the same three songs over and over. I forced myself not to do that this time. Well, I say forced, but it actually wasn't that hard. Um, which might be a foreboding statement. I'm hoping it just isn't taken that way. But I mean, we're gonna fuck with audience retention a little bit here. I know I should be hypothetically saving this for like the end or near the end of the video for like retention shit or whatever, but like I'll just like straight up say, in case somebody wants to click out, because I know personally when I check out album reviews, I love sort of having like a little bit of an echo chamber. Like if I really fuck with this album, I'm going to be watching like all of the reviews that are like, super positive for it, because I'm just like, oh yeah, I loved that part too, or like, oh, I didn't think about this thing like that way, like I'm definitely very guilty of doing that. Or the reverse is true. If I really hate something, I love seeing people sort of roast a project, maybe a little bit spitefully. um but so I'll just throw it out in the beginning. My general thoughts on Harry's House. um to be honest, I really hoped it would have grown on me throughout my multiple listens, and it kind of just stayed the same, which I think that's not inherently a bad thing. Because it means that it's definitely better than it my opinion about something getting worse, you know. But just putting it all the cards onto the table right away, so you can click away if you want. I didn't hate it, but it's not my favorite album of 2022 thus far, to be perfectly honest, and we'll get into why a little bit. But like I said, I wrote down all of my notes, sort of going through going through the um, going through the album. I just stubbed my toe, but we're gonna ignore that. So I have like my first impressions, and then like my second listen, my third listen, sort of the later listens kind of end up getting blended together a bit, because ultimately my opinions didn't really change that much. So we're gonna split the video into a couple parts because of that. So this first stretch, I want to specifically talk about my first listen and what a first listening, or at least an ideal first listen experience is for me personally. I know some people really love having their first listen officially be in a car. I know some people like headphones. Some people have these like very expensive speakers. I have very expensive speakers, but I usually don't listen to music like that on them. They're mostly for audio mixing and like work related stuff. But I personally love just like sitting in my room with like my headphones on. I have these like noise canceling ones that like I can sort of like EQ a bit if I want to, and that's just like sort of like my vibe. Like I don't like being interrupted during a first album listen. Ideally, I play it from like front to back without like ever pausing. I have like the lyrics out in front of me. It's like it becomes like a whole ritual, if that makes any sense, because that's just how I feel. A first listen is just so precious as an experience. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. Let me know if you do, but I just really like to sort of sanctify that, in a sense. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but because of that, I'm glad I didn't really run into any issues with my first listen. I wasn't really interrupted. I didn't have any lag issues like when I was streaming it, which is always fun, because the amount of albums I've had where it's just like, it's one of those things where all of like the tracks seamlessly blend into each other, which I personally love from like a creative standpoint, but like the practical aspects of it could get like kind of messy. This album didn't really do it that much, so it's not like I would have noticed it anyway. But there have been times where I've like, for example, I listened to Aluna George's. Actually, I think it's just Aluna. But like she had a she did like a DJ set or whatever, and it was like the whole thing is on Apple Music, and obviously because it's a DJ set, it's like one long, you know, series, but it's split up into separate tracks. And the way that it's split up makes it sound so disjointed. Sometimes it lines up really well, and a lot of times it doesn't. Um, and only gets worse if you're like having internet issues, for example, while you're streaming. Um, I didn't have any problems this time, so I'm really happy about that. Also, thank you for following Jojo Game Game. I'm sorry my alerts aren't working for some reason. But thank you for the follow. I hope your night is, well, actually, I don't know what time zone it is for you, but I hope your day is going well. We were just talking about Harry's house. I keep almost calling it Harry's home. It's like actually ridiculous. Um, but yeah, so we're sort of covering my first impressions from my first listen, and we're going to be splitting it out throughout the night to sort of um, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess like sort of follow the growth or decay of like my opinions on an album. No, it's good. I don't want to interrupt. Oh no, don't worry. Like that. This is like a whole. This is why I stream these live instead of like just do separate recordings by myself. Like, I just like the live element of it. So feel free to like chime in anytime, or if you just want to like sit and vibe, that's cool too. I don't want anyone to feel like that they're interrupting me, because the reality is like I interrupt myself all the time anyway because I'm ADHD as fuck. So, but yeah, no, welcome on in though. Oh, what was I saying? Yeah, so I'm glad that my first listen, environment wise, was like perfect. I get to really just like focus on everything that was going on. I actually listened to it literally the moment it came out. I did like my little midnight release sort of, not party, but because it's just sitting in my room like in the dead of night, with like my little like basic string lights up, and then I like made some tea. But so right from the get-go, I had some thoughts about the album opener, Music for a Sushi Restaurant. Now I remember in a couple of interviews I had read leading up to the album. Normally I don't read too many unless it's like somebody I really stan, like Lana or whatever, for example, Lana or Lord, because they just never talk to press. Like normally I don't read too much ahead of time, but this time I did because it just showed up in my feed, and I was just like, why not? And I know that he had said that there had been like some heavy Prince influences on some of the tracks, and I definitely sort of got the vibe immediately from this one. There's like other influences too. Like it's not, I wouldn't say it's entirely like a Prince ripoff kind of like vibe, but I will say Music for a Sushi Restaurant, as far as the first listen was concerned, I didn't really love it, which I hate saying when it's an album opener, because like you really want that album opener to be like just sort of pulling you in, and it just didn't really do that for me. There are aspects of the song that I think are cute. I think like the horn section is like kind of cute. It's I immediately noticed something that we'll see throughout the rest of the album is like his vocal delivery is very different on it for a large stretch of it. Something that he does a lot on Harry's House that he hasn't really done that much in the past is like his vocals are a lot airier, and he's a lot quieter during this album. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have his like typical like Harryisms. Like there's still some dramatic vocal flares that are on this track, like included. So like Harry Styles is still very much there. He's still definitely a like a good male vocalists, which we love because there are lots of lots of men in the music industry. I'm shading all men right now, by the way. That kind of give us nothing. They don't give us like any charisma. They don't give us like they just don't serve the vocals like they should be. And I'm glad that um as annoying as it can be to like hear people say over and over again of like how much like Harry Styles is like, oh, he's like challenging masculinity and like gender norms, and it'll just be like him wearing like wearing a fucking Dorothy from Wizard of Oz outfit. It's like the ugliest Halloween costume ever. Um, but like in this case, I will say that like he is able to keep himself consistently interesting, at least stylistically as a vocalist. He still has he still does have some boy band isms with how he delivers some things tonally, but for like the most part, I definitely feel him getting more comfortable in his own sound. I had watched sort of in like preparation for this, I wanted to see um, how other people sort of have been feeling about this album, and I had watched a YouTuber that does like a lot of reviews that I respect. He's John Denton. He's like a British YouTuber, I believe, and he's like a music producer. And something that he talked about that I absolutely think is true is like when you look at just like the first couple of records that he's done, because he only has like 3 solo records out right now. Like the self-titled debut was definitely, it had its work cut out for him when it came to separating himself from One Direction. Um, Now, in my opinion, I say this as if this is like a hot take, but it's a pretty cold take. Um, he's definitely one of the, in my opinion, one of the more distinct members from that group. I would say like Zayn and Harry, I always knew were going to go solo at some point. I mean, I guess they all ended up going solo anyway, but like I just think of like how like their vocals sound, their like timbre has been like also the sorts of artists that they're inspired by. Um, and just feeling like, okay, like I can listen to just like one bar of like any given song and know immediately who's singing, which I think is a good, I think that's like good. I really like artists that are able to sort of like be so, even if they're not like the most unique like alt girly voice in the world, if I can at least recognize you from like just like one note, personally I think that's star power. um but even so, even if he does have like such a distinct identity within the context of a group, the context of a solo artist is completely different, and I do think a lot of his early stuff is like actively pushing against like the boy band vibe by digging very deeply into his classic rock influences, which I understand the strategy behind it. I mean, like on one hand, just like, you know, you're making music that inspires you. It's music that you really like. Well, I'm assuming he really likes them. And it's not just like a whole like brand kind of deal, but like on top of that, it's just like, okay, like you're pulling from adult contemporary influences. So like I believe he said like for on like the self-titled record, like ahead of it, is being like, I'm not making music for the radio. There aren't really strong singles off of this one. I just want to make music that like proves to people that I can make grown-up adult music. I'm not just making like teen pop, which is like, don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with teen pop. I'm like 100% a stan. I feel like I feel like most gay men will be will be super into sort of teen poppy, at least sentiments lyrically, um just because we're all emotionally stunted. I'm just kidding. No, but it's just like it's like, you know, we're Taylor and Olivia stans like for a reason, all right? You know, we like that sort of like songwriting from it, but So personally, like, you know, I was never gonna give some I was never gonna give him shit for being like in a boy band. I Even if One Direction wasn't necessarily my taste when they were like a thing, they still had a handful of songs that I enjoyed, and the common denominator in them was like he was like a co-writer on them. But so I want to get this like out of the way as like a disclaimer, despite the fact that I will probably not sound like particularly positive about this album. I do consider myself a Harry Styles fan. I don't love every single decision he makes. I think I know people feel differently about whether he's like, you know, queer baiting or not. I kind of go back and forth between some of the camps, but I where I'm at kind of now is like I do feel like at the very least he's like benefiting off of queer aesthetics at this point, and it's why I've kind of just like I've really written off letting cisgender heterosexual men have the title like gay icon in my mind personally. I've never really been like a total fan of that personally, but um because they always disappoint me. but but it's just like, you know, I do worry a little bit sometimes that like will there be a moment where it just sort of like tips over a little bit into like really problematic territory. I don't know. Obviously I don't obviously I don't have anything against straight people. Like me saying that is just you know, I'm like mostly memeing, but I do think it is like important to acknowledge that, you know, when a lot of your brand is like based off of like, you know, challenging gender norms and, you know, using queer aesthetics and sort of going into like the more flamboyant imagery of like certain eras where a lot of artists were like either queer or were queer coded, and that's where a lot of their visual flair came from. It's like from those influences, like you do have to acknowledge that there's like, you know, there's an iterative quality to it, and you kind of have to decide on your own personal code whether that counts as like appropriation, or is this queer baiting if it's like somebody who's like not explicitly queer, or does somebody owe you explicit queerness in order to be sort of entangled with these sorts of qualities. That's up to you to decide. I'm personally going into the territory like now, or like it's creeping up on me. I am like a little concerned for um for the future, but like for now it's just kind of like, you know, it's this doesn't feel like a queer baiting record. Like I'll say that now. I know that some people were like um were already getting their Twitter fingers ready for having in like the track list Boyfriends and Love of My Life back to back. That they're like, oh my god, like he's just queer beating again, and like this is like him just toying with everybody's like emotions, and I'm just like, I don't know if I necessarily feel that way. That feels, I can understand where you're coming from, and like they're probably memeing, but if you're being like sort of genuine about it, it's like a little bit of a stretch in my mind, but that's just me. um but but yeah, to it's a very long roundabout way to like talk about the album opener. um it wasn't really for me. Short and sweet. um to be honest, the first stretch of the album actually doesn't do anything for me, and for me that's not a good sign for a record. If like I'm not even a fan of like the first three songs. I out of the first three, I would say I like Grape Juice the most. I know a lot of people are like, oh, this is the spiritual successor to like Watermelon Sugar. Personally, anything remotely related to Watermelon Sugar at this point gets immediately kicked out the door, because I'm so tired of being waterboarded with that song every other minute. But like but I don't hear the similarities. I only like see like, oh, it's like it's just fruit imagery again. um but I guess out of the three, that's the one that I like the most. But um yeah, I'm sorry to say that I don't like late night talking. It didn't wow me on like the first listen, and then I was really hoping it would grow on me, and it just didn't. It's why I am a little bit concerned that like, oh, this is the second single off of the album. I don't know how I feel about it. Like I don't really see myself enjoying hearing it on the radio. Um, for in my opinion, it's just like, as much as I don't mind sort of like a breezier quality to song, like I guess overall this is like a very low key album. It's very easy listening, um very inoffensive if you want to just have it on in the background. um I know that I have like friends who are like, hi Shuggy, welcome back. I know I have like friends who, if they've listened to like a lot of city pop and future funk, that like even if this album isn't really related to those genres at all, it still sort of scratches a similar itch. So like if you like something that's sort of in that realm and you don't mind a pretty low energy record overall, you might enjoy this. It personally is a hard sell for me, because it's just not the type of music that I like to listen to. That's just me though, which maybe makes me a little bit of a hypocrite because like I am like I have I have liked Lana's recent albums. I am an Evermore stan, and like all of those are very sleepy, very um easygoing overall kind of vibes. So like if you want to call me a hypocrite, that's cool too. But but yeah, no, I feel like I still love As It Was. That's sort of like what picks up the album again for me, which is like, much needed at that point because I was not feeling the first three songs. I still think that's one of my favorite songs of his, at least like in the pop realm. I just got back and I gotta go. All right, well that's I mean that's fine. Like no worries. Have a great night. Um, I'll get you soon. Thanks for coming through though. I know my streaming schedule has been like a little bit whack recently, so um, what was I saying though? I Yeah, I still really like, at least like for pop songs that are in like his solo catalog, that's still one of my favorite singles of his. Even if it is just like an aha ripoff, if it's like it is very similar, at least musically and a little bit structure wise, to Take On Me. I'm not the first person to call that out, and I'm definitely not the last. Um, I'm sure that was the idea. Like it's so similar that like there's no way that it wasn't intentional in a sense, but like it's just different enough to where like they don't have to give them songwriting credits, I'm pretty sure. um but I still like that song a lot. I'm a little disappointed because I kind of expected the direction of like the album was going to be more in that kind of vibe, and it just wasn't. And I think that might be like an instance of like expectations being the bane of my existence. And some people wouldn't really let that influence their scores. Some people would. I'm sort of feeling like this did influence my final grade for the record, which we will get into at the very end. Um, but because like it's hard not to feel like there is maybe a missed opportunity sort of there. I knew that he was going for a different sort of era music wise. Like he's done with like the late 60s, 70s, pop rock, soft rock kind of vibe. He's like entering his 80s era, and I'm just like, it feels like every pop artist at this point has an 80s era. So I was like, if As It Was going to be the tone setter for that, I was going to be completely on board. I love the song, melodically. I think it has a very catchy hook, even if it is pretty simple. And I also just like how personal the lyrics sort of are in comparison to like his other stuff, at least like singles wise. um Especially when you take into consideration like the situation with his current partner, Olivia Wilde. Oh, I feel like I should acknowledge very quickly, I always say this and it ends up being a super long tangent, but I swear this time. So last video when I said I was going to be checking out this record because I wanted the tea, I just want to say that I was joking. I'm not, interested in like prying into the personal lives that are going on right now, especially when Olivia Wilde has been facing a ton of scrutiny from Harry's fan base and like the Larrys, which is like honestly ridiculous, not mentally well. Some of these like kids, it's like, are just mad at her because they don't get to date him. They're saying all of these like terrible things about like the fallout of like her relationship and like what's happening with her kids. They're just calling her problematic every 5 seconds when it's like a complicated situation that they don't know the ins and outs of. I'm not going to pretend that I do either. I just think it's like something very personal, and it's something that I feel bad that it ends up being so public just because of the nature of them being both celebrities and this being a high profile relationship overall. I just see like all of like the online discourse around it. It's just like, look, when I said that I was I wanted to like get the tea on the relationship in this album, I just wanted to say that I was joking. For the most part, I was never going to be like invasive or anything about it, but I don't think anybody misconstrued that for me at all. But I just wanted to go on the record and be like, artists will share what they want to share about their lives, and we have to like accept that. As much as I would love for him to sort of create more emotional stakes lyrically on the album overall, at the end of the day, I can't fault him for being like, hey, look, this is the part of my life I want to talk about. We're not gonna go here. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Let's pick ourselves up, let's keep it together, and let's keep listening. But it is kind of a bummer though that it is sort of like the peak of or at least how I sort of saw it, sort of the peak of self-reflection that we really get from him, that's specifically in relation to substance abuse and his like mental health. That he does touch on it on like other parts of the record, but for the most part it stays pretty surface level. And I feel like this song is just so specific for a pop song even, but like as like a song in general, that I was just like, oh, is this gonna be like a super real record? And it's kind of not. Or at least I didn't really feel that way. Reading the Apple Music descriptions he has for it and like a couple of the articles, it's just like, the title Harry's House. Well, one, it's a reference to something, but it's like mostly like in like relation to the pandemic and like his like lifestyle as like a musician. Like it involves like traveling a lot. It's like ultimately it's deciding like what's your home, and sort of the balance of sort of like restlessness when it comes to this lifestyle, but then like also having to like slow down and realize that certain things in your life are changing at this specific age. And it's just sort of a meditation on that, and I fully respect that as a concept. I just kind of wish it went into it like a little bit more, because a lot of this album does kind of just read as like a scatter of of love songs. But that's just kind of like how I feel about it. But yeah, I guess like in conclusion with the whole as it was late night talking thing, I'm a little disappointed that like this is what the second single off the album is, and that it's probably going to be another one that gets radio play, because I personally think that late night talking is like kind of a snoozer. And what's wild is like I don't know that there are any other songs that I would pick as singles off of this, which like I respect an artist that's like, I'm not going to make a pop record that is going to have like a lot of big singles on it. The storytelling comes first, and like so I do respect the artistic intent behind it, to like be like, I'm not going to make music for TikTok, I'm not going to make music for like whatever for like the charts. I just want to like make music. That's cool. Obviously no shade to artists who do curate their music based around TikTok. I feel really bad for like artists like Halsey who like are being kept from releasing music because their labels want them to be more TikTok oriented with their music, which I think is like so like bonkers when it's like fucking Halsey who's like definitely not like a small indie artist that needs to blow up on TikTok in order to for her music to do relatively well. But that's a whole other video though. Um, I just feel like if you're, if it's decidedly like not going to be formatted as a pop record in that sense, that you would put a little bit more story in, I guess. But the reality is a lot of this album feels kind of like the ideas came first before the music was actually like executed, and because of that, in a lot of instances it doesn't exactly meet the the ambition that it sets out to do. um I will say, Daylight, did I really have a lot of thoughts on Daylight? I'm going through my notes right now from like my first listen. um yeah, I think okay, so what I have written down here is Daylight is nice and breezy, enjoyed with first listen, don't know that I've returned to it. That was prophetic. I have not returned to it past any of like the required listens that I sort of set for myself in order to commit myself to a full review. It's not a song that I sort of put on a playlist to like return to. It did grow on me like a tiny bit, but it's like a little bit too low stakes for me. Um Little Freak. Okay, I have so many thoughts about Little Freak. Here's the thing. So I like it overall, but Harry Styles does this thing consistently where he writes like the unsexiest lyrics about sexual imagery ever. And I really think Dangling Like a Wet Dream is like one of the worst lyrics that I've like I've like been subjected to this year, from like an imagery standpoint. It's like, look, I'm a sex positive person. I like fully am like, if you want to use your music to like sort of express your sexuality and like be like honest about, X, Y, or Z, like I think that's fine. But like I think there are also times where I'm just like, there's just certain words that I just don't enjoy, like in a song. And I mean, like, I feel like a common one for a lot of people is like, I like, let's keep the word moist out of our mouths, thank you very much. um but in this case, it's just like that first verse on this song like really pulled me out of the listening experience quite a bit, which is so sad because like it's a nicely composed song. I like the lyrics for like the rest of the song. The melody is like nice, the harmonies are really good. It's just that first verse, like I cringe every time I listen to it. And he's done this like on other albums too. Like I know in the closing track, I think it is on self-titled, he talks about like playing with himself, and I'm like, this isn't like, I don't know, this isn't for me. I know granted, on the context of like that song is supposed to be like, it's not supposed to be sexy, it's not supposed to be cool, it's not flirty, it's just him being like, I'm literally so sad and bored in this hotel room that I'm gonna like touch myself and feel uncool as a result of it. I'm just like, okay, that's, thank you for being honest, thank you for sharing with the class, but I also think we should maybe know a little bit less about each other, thank you very much. So sadly, like it keeps me from saying I love the song, but I do like it. I just wish I could like crop out just that line specifically. And like I get that within the context of the song, it's just like, Little Freak, it's like talking about, I mean, it's a very sexual song, but it's like delivered in like a very sweet way. It's like sort of a little bit tongue-in-cheek in sort of the sense that like Olivia Wilde, I'm assuming this is, I'm assuming a lot of the album is like about Olivia, in a way anyway. I know lots of Harry stans are like, I refuse to believe any of these songs or any of this album is about Olivia. It's just like, well, you already lost that game with like the lead single, but go off, I guess. But I'm assuming it's like in relation to like the slut shaming that she's been like receiving online ever since they were confirmed to be a couple. And like how she's like a Jezebel, and how she's like she's like awful or whatever. There's a return to that sentiment on boyfriends as well. um he really accepts this person for who they are, ignores how other people perceive them, and just I can tell that the sentiment is very much there. So like I do love the core message of the song. It's just the parts of the delivery, not the biggest fan of. That's what I have written down for like my first listen. Stays the exact same. Like spoiler alert, it stays the same for like my follow up listens as well. Um, Matilda. Okay, we have to talk about Matilda. I love that song. I've tweeted about it so much at this point. It was like on my Instagram story. It is the best song of the album. Argue with the Wall. I love it. It's an amazing. It's like I know it's about. Well, it's okay. So it's told within like the framework of like the Roald Dahl book, but it could be like applied to a real person, if that makes any sense. Like they're like drawing parallels between the story and like this person who like um isn't accepted by their family for whatever reason. They don't feel like they belong, and like they're sort of, it's just sort of reassuring them like as they get older, like you're not talking to like like this family anymore, and like you're realizing that like you have more in common with your found family through like your friends and everything, and like maybe you don't invite them to dinner parties anymore. Maybe that's like kind of sad, but like the same time as like you're preserving your peace, like I feel like that's a very relatable sentiment as like a queer person. I don't know that the person this song is written about like is queer, but I connected to it a lot. I think it's very sweet. It's a very well composed and put together song. It's honestly one of my favorites from his in like his ballad handbook. So even if I'm not crazy about the rest of the album, I will give him props. Matilda is a serve, and I love it. And this is a song that I do return to quite a bit, outside of the context of the record, which is good because it means that like, okay, so there's two songs that I will revisit off of this 13-track album now that I'm no longer committed to listening to it to compose some semblance of a written and recorded, I mean. I don't really know that there's like much more that I can say about Matilda personally. I guess it's sort of so I'll be honest, something that did disappoint me about the album is like, I mean, is anyone else a Falling stan in chat? I love Falling off of Fine Line. I really love the drama of it. I love like sort of the last leg kind of emotional feel of it, and it's just like there isn't really a moment on Harry's House that sort of has that gravity behind it and like that level of heartache. And that's not to say that like he has to be miserable on this album for me to like it, because like I get that the vibe is like it's very easygoing, it's very breezy, like almost in some instances is like calming, and because of that, putting like a very sad piano ballad like stamped in the middle of it, it's like not gonna it's probably gonna kill the vibe a little bit. So I understand from like a sequencing standpoint why that was not going to be the case. I think Matilda is the closest we get to that, which like I still like the song, so like it's fine. But it does sort of like remind me of like how low the emotional stakes are on this record, and it's just kind of like a personal thing for me that I do like to have like a bit of an arc, a bit of like a narrative when you're following a story. I feel like that's why breakup records are like very very common, in like a lyrical sense. For there's like a lot of overlap with themes because it's like something that's been done so many times before, that it naturally has a narrative arc to it, because it's just like, okay, this person broke your heart, you feel like shit, you feel like shit, you feel like shit, you're like maybe revisiting your other options, but you're realizing you're not ready to move on yet, you feel like shit, you feel like shit, you feel like shit, and by the end you have closure, or some semblance of it. Personally, I think society is ready for us to have breakup albums that are miserable the entire way through, and they don't end with self-reflection or growth. It is just all wallowing. But it's like good wallowing. That makes any sense. Um, but no, we don't really get that here. If you're looking for a sad Harry album, just going off of like the lyrics of As It Was, or thinking about, you know, this album being in relation to the pandemic, you're not going to find that here. It stays pretty light. It doesn't. It's not. That's not to say that it's an emotionless record or that it's like all joy, because it's not all joy. It just feels. Sometimes it just feels like maybe a little bit hazy, maybe a little bit fatigued. Um, Overall, and sometimes I'm in the mood for that, but a lot of the times I'm not, and that's why this record was never going to connect with me in the same way that Fine Line did, for example, which even then Fine Line's not my favorite Harry Styles record, to be perfectly honest. But okay, so Cinema, since we're going down like the track listing. So track 8 is Cinema. To be honest, I it's a skip for me. It doesn't do anything for me at all. Neither does Daydreaming, which I think is maybe an unpopular opinion. Um, Keep Driving. So Keep Driving falls in the same camp of like songs in Harry Styles' discography that sound a little bit too similar, at least from like a musical standpoint, to other songs. To where it's like, they were listening to this song specifically when they were like writing this. But it does have like a lot of it feels very similar to Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears. I don't know if anybody else kind of catches that vibe, but it's like sort of in the same sense that As It was like that Aha song, where it's just like, it's lyrically it's not the same, the chords aren't exactly the same, and like obviously his vocal melodies like aren't the same, but like the vibe is so similar and like uncanny that you can't help but feel like, okay, yeah, no, he went into the studio, talked to his producers and said, I want a beat that sounds like this, and they're like, okay, bet. And then they just they just like pull directly from it influentially. And it's like, there's nothing inherently wrong with being influenced by like, I mean, obviously there's nothing wrong with being influenced by other artists, because like at this, everything's iterative, nobody's 100% original anymore. We have to accept that like obviously musicians are very likely going to be listening to like other musicians because they love music enough for it to be a career. So because of that, like they're going to be listening to other stuff, and they're going to be wanting to make cool shit that they think is cool based off of shit that they like, so and also he's not the first artist to pull from like an era of music, stylistically and musically, because that's like kind of every pop star at this point. Like I said earlier, everybody has an 80s era. There's like a little stretch where people had like if they were like a pop artist, they'd have like a little bit of like a 90s thing going on. I think we've sort of seen a resurgence of like 70s singer-songwriter sort of acoustic pop as well, with like a lot of artists who are like sort of experimenting with like twee as well. But that's like a thing he already started his career doing, so he's sort of moved on to, now he's in his 80s era, but he's not fully committing to it. It's still sort of like he's half in, half out the door of Harry's house. that was a stupid joke, but yeah, I don't know. It's like, as much as I do think the album really picks up in the second half, and it does sort of start to sound a little bit more unique to his normal stuff because more synths are being added. It's like his vocal delivery continues to be very light, very airy. It doesn't really have a lot of Harryisms. It does mean that like a lot of the theatrics of like a Harry Styles record that I really look forward to when I listen to a Harry Styles record is like largely missing. It feels all like compounded into like the opening track, and then it kind of just like coasts for the rest of the album, and personally that's not really a thing that I love. I will say, as far as the last stretch of the album goes, I do like Satellite quite a bit. I as far as the first impression was concerned, I do like Boyfriends. Hello, the gay guy loves Boyfriends. That's so stupid. Um, it's like pretty simple. It's like pretty straightforward. It's just like talking about like how like, oh, like all of your boyfriends would say terrible things about you. It's going back to like sort of the similar like, oh, she's a Jezebel sort of situation that Lil Freak had, but just sort of uh like it's like slightly different. It's still not my favorite off of this album. It's not even my favorite like ballad from Harry, but like I do like the harmonies. I do like how it builds as the song goes on, so like that is a plus. And then Love of My Life. So I really don't like anything Harry provides on this song, but I think the production is really fun and like the general melody is good. So it's like it does feel weird to be like, oh, I'm listening to a Harry Styles song, but it's not for Harry Styles like at all. It really is just for like the production aspects of it. Um, as far as my first listen was concerned, wasn't a big fan of it being the album closer personally. Um, there's sort of like a number of reasons for. There was like a part of me, at least for a bit, that was just like, I really I really wanted Matilda to be the album closer in the sense that it's like it kind of gives me similar vibes to Hope You're Okay off of Sour, where it like sort of ends with like Harry looking outside of like his own life and like thinking of like this other person and following their own emotional journey. It's like sort of, you know, stepping outside of like the world that has been like established in this record, to be focusing on and like looking outward, if that makes any sense. um so at least, so that was how I felt about my first listen anyway. That part does change. I do like it better as an album closer now, but as far as the first listen is concerned, I wanted Matilda to be the closer. um my first impressions overall for the album was, I feel like he played it really safe. It's why it's like surprising to me whenever I read in like a review or like on Twitter, then be like, oh my god, like this is the most confident Harry Styles has ever sounded, or this is his like most self-assured record to date, and like he's finally found his sound. I'm just like, I think he's finding like the direction of his music for sure, but I don't know that this is like, I would not consider Harry's House his magnum opus when it comes to like finding his own personal sound, because he's still very much pulling from the same influences, not the same influences, but he's pulling from his influences in the same way that he has on past records. It's just the era is different this time, and you know, that's, yeah, evolution does not necessarily equate growth in this case, if that makes any sense. Like, he might be changing his aesthetics, he might be changing the era he's pulling from. He can change his hair, he can change his clothes, he can change your mind. That's the way it goes. But at the end of the day, it's just like he's still leaning so heavily on his own influences that it can be a little bit distracting sometimes, because you can't help but feel like, what does this artist look like within a vacuum? Like when he's not like drenched in pastiche of like 20th century music, you know, like, who is Harry Styles? And I just didn't really get a great sense of that from him on this like album. Is it my least favorite Harry record? I don't know necessarily that I even think that any of his albums are really bad. But like I don't see myself actively returning to this album except for like As It Was and Matilda. But I feel like I hear As It Was enough to where it kind of like on the radio to where it already feels like it's on my playlist anyway, so I don't actually need to add it. And then Matilda, as I mean, I feel like everybody loves Matilda. You know, that like it's a very cold take to say that it's like the best song on the album. I mean, let me know if you disagree. Anyway, my first score, 6 out of 10. I think it was actually no 6.5 out of 10, but that was like a generous half. I know some people may say that as like a very negative score. I personally feel like it's fair. I would say that for myself, it's accurate to where I feel about it, because it's like it's not a mid album. Like, it still has nice qualities about it. The vocals are still fine. It's just like he's still figuring himself out as a songwriter, in my opinion. I just feel like when I hear other artists that are like pulling from this era, there's like smarter wordplay, there's like better narrative structure. Um, there's just kind of stronger performances overall. I think sometimes that I think get lost on him when he's like not really pushing himself as hard as he can be. And I do think an element of that is that he's been working with the same producers and co-writers for all three albums. Which, like, on one hand, you can argue it's just like, okay, well, you know, when he feels comfortable in this space with these people and feels safe with them, that he should be encouraged to continue creating with them and not be forced to step out of his own vibe. And like, I totally get that, but it's just like I really wanted a dramatic change in sound and I just didn't get that. If he was really going for like the 80s kind of sound, I'm honestly surprised that Jack Antonoff isn't on this album like at all. At least to my knowledge he's not, because I feel like if he really wanted to go for like that 80s vibe, Jack would have been the perfect producer to work with. Um which, like, I get it. I know that the Jack Antonoff cinematic universe is kind of like a meme at this point, and like everybody hates seeing his name stamped everywhere, but like I'll be honest, like I think Harry working with Jack could yield some very interesting results. um and I'm sort of hoping that moving forward, like, you get I do think him working with new people would be is much needed at this point, 3 albums in. um it's not saying that he can never work with these people again, obviously. Like, he can still work with the same songwriters and producers on certain things. Um and like, also, I should throw out that like I like the producers that he's like worked with. I mean, like, I love Kid Harpoon's like production and like his like songwriting, especially with like what he's done with like Florence and the Machine, for example. But like, again, it's like when you work with the same person, I feel like it's very easy to play things pretty safe, and I can see that kind of being an issue on Harry's House. Um, Scrolling through my notes, um, as far as my second listen is concerned, because we're going to, this is the part where of the video where I kind of like split it a tiny bit. Um, some of the quirks for music for a sushi restaurant are growing on me. It's still not a fan of I don't know why I wrote I still would not be a fan of actually hearing it I think I'm talking about like hearing the song in a sushi restaurant. I mean, yeah, this isn't, despite it being called music for a sushi restaurant, this does not seem like a fun sushi restaurant song personally. I like something like a little bit more chill, and if it's going to be more upbeat, I kind of want it to be like a little bit more deliberately poppy. I don't really I don't, I think it might be a little bit too extra for like the chill vibe that I like for my sushi restaurants, but that's just personal preference. Late night talking. Okay, so it's still weaker. I've still found it weaker than as it was. It makes more sense as a second single now, but like I would have rather just have like a very powerful lead single and then just leave it. Have some promo singles in the background, but as far as like anything else from this record, I really don't see there being any other single. I know there will be, and maybe hearing this album on like the radio with like the singles that they do pick will make me like it more. Like, maybe if I actually hear Late Night Talking on a car ride, I'll be more into it. But as of now, I'm just like, it's like serviceable as a single, um but I don't know. Grape Juice is growing on me, though I wish it was more dynamic. I feel like that's fairly accurate. It's a very chill song that doesn't really move anywhere, and like, again, if you like that mood, if you like that vibe where it's like relatively inoffensive, it's like easy listening, then like go for it. I do think if you like Grape Juice and like Grape Juice is the vibe you like, then you probably do really like this album, because a lot of the album carries that same energy. Um it's just, for me, it's like, yes, it's relatively inoffensive, but I just find personally that it's to its detriment from time to time. Um, I'm trying to find. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, I was looking for this note, but so as much as I like Satellite, it really does sound like an indie bedroom pop song from the 2010s. Like, it's pretty standard for like, like the beat that sounds like slightly programmed, but it's like still probably live instrumentation. It's just sort of like EQ'd so much that it sounds synthetic. Um, Very sort of like watery ish like guitars. If I'm thinking of the right song anyway. Um, with like, you know, like a bass line that like is, you know, you're not gonna be finding outside of like like a funkier kind of vibe. Um, that's not true. That's not an accurate way that I would describe it. I do like a solid bass line. I do think this song has, for me, it's like, is it doing the most? No. Is it giving me everything? No. But is it like, does it thump enough to like get the job done? Yes. And like as much as it really is pulling from that indie pop Tumblr vibe, I do I do enjoy it. I do like Satellite. Satellite could potentially be a song I return to, but as of now, I haven't. I just remember being like, yeah, it's cute. It's cute enough. Um, but overall, I'd say my score on like my second listen, and sort of to keep it consistent with my follow up listens, my score hasn't really changed. It's sort of sat at a 6.5 out of 10 for me. Um, I think I'm just yeah. I think I'm just disappointed. I'm a little bit disappointed. I don't like saying that, but because then I have to accept that it's real. Um, but I don't know. I just hope Harry sort of pushes himself a little bit more on the next one. I would love to see him work with different producers and different songwriters, instead of keeping it so close to home. No pun intended. Um, I also recognize though that with this song being recorded during the pandemic, a thing that they definitely shot for was a more intimate vibe. It was keeping it sort of with from working with like the same people. It was just kind of like a jam session that like a lot of times just took place in like a very low key setting. I definitely get that vibe, and like I respect it. I also understand that like, I mean, this was something that I was really interested in exploring sort of mentally in the beginning of the pandemic, was thinking about like, you know, obviously there's lots of albums that are going to come out during 2020 and maybe later that were worked on before lockdown. And then it just takes so long usually after things are recorded for them to finally come out, because then there's like mixing, there's like engineering stuff, there's like relayering some vocals, there's and that's just like on like the musical side of it. Then it's not even like taking into consideration that there's tons of promo that happens leading up to like an album. There's so much planning and so much just figuring out the album sequencing, and honestly probably having to argue with a with a board room full of music execs to fight for some songs to be on the project, you know. So I figured for at least the first stretch of 2020 that albums were going to sound relatively, you know, normal, but as we got further on, that they would start becoming more like, you know, more visibly not lo-fi per se, but like definitely more stripped back. And it doesn't mean that there haven't been like fun pop records or fun electronic projects or anything. It just means like you can kind of tell that there's been like a little bit of a sea change. And I was always just sort of like interested in hearing from, especially from bigger artists, like what that would sound like, because I know that's how things were for Lord, that's how the new Florence and the Machine record went, and that's definitely how this album went. And it's interesting to think about like how I feel so differently about all three, despite them being affected by the same environment. I mean, obviously, I was going to perceive them differently because they're vastly different artists from each other, but they're still sort of like in the pop adjacent landscape, if not actually being straight up pop, but just making music that is like inspired by, you know, like older eras, which is obviously not a unique thing to them, because musicians have been using nostalgia for like the longest time, because it's just like, hey, I really liked this music growing up, I'm gonna make music that sounds like it, and it's gonna be inherently nostalgic when you do that, you know. But I think those are my final thoughts actually for Harry's House. I'm surprised. I was worried I was going to be super long-winded about this. Um, and feel like I'm talking in circles, but to be honest, this feels like a pretty complete what's the word I'm looking for? A pretty complete take, I guess. Yeah, it's like I don't hate Harry's House, but is she my fave? No. I feel weird saying it is like my least favorite Harry Styles solo project because like it doesn't feel that way, but like I really like self-titled and I really like Fine Line, and they just feel like stronger pop records because of how dynamic they are. And maybe he just wasn't trying. I mean, I guess he always says he's not trying to make pop music, but like he's like considering the camps he's grown up in, like as a songwriter and as a performer, he is always going to be like a little bit pop, if not kind of subversively pop. Um, Pop sort of dressed up in an alternative way, if you will. Um, and I'll always have my varying feelings about that. I'm hoping he's not like I don't think he's like a snob about music. I don't think he's like pop as a bad word or anything. I know there are like so many pretentious artists. They're just like, oh my god, I could never touch pop music with like a 100-foot pole. But then like they'll still be making like a 3-chord song with like a verse, a pre-chorus, a chorus, like the basic structure, and it's still like formatted like a pop song harmonically, and the production is still very trendy, but they'll claim to be like such an alternative, like different artists. And it's like, no, girl, own up to your pop. It's okay to be pop. Okay? We love pop. I don't know why that's so aggressive, but I mean that's just how I feel. I know everybody kind of goes through that era of like hating pop music. Well, not everybody. 'Cause I don't know that I ever went through an era of hating pop music. I think I was always sort of aware that even like alternative stuff I was listening to was still very much just like a pop album dressed up a little bit differently. Um, but there were definitely other people in college that um, that I fought with a little bit about poptimism. But I mean, I'm not gonna force somebody to listen to like a Charlie XTX, um, Charlie X T Rex. What? Hello? Like a Charlie XCX record, for example, or at least like the new one, because I guess that's more overtly pop. I guess like her other stuff is like it's like hyper pop alternative kind of vibe, but still like formatted in pop. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with pop girls. All right, if there's one takeaway you get from this stream, is that there is nothing wrong with pop. Point blank. Period. But oh my god, hello. With all that being said, thank you, Brain Cell, for figuring it out. Those are my final thoughts about Harry's House. Keeping myself from calling it Harry's Home. I would love to know your thoughts about the album. Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'm not gonna say what did you rate it, because that's not my thing. I'm not Anthony Fantano. I mean, I'm definitely not, because like he formats his videos way better than mine. I think I just talked for like 40 minutes and with like my notes app open. but I hope this is content that's like interests y'all. Maybe it's something you want to see return to the channel. Maybe it flops, you don't want me to ever talk about music again. Let me know. But until then, as a reminder, I stream Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time at twitch.tv/girlnextdoor podcast. Come through, enjoy the vibe. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not already. It is also Girl Next Door Podcast. And am I really gonna say like, favorite, and subscribe on Twitch? Probably not, but but I'm thinking about it because that's the thing that everybody says. But anyways, I hope y'all have a good morning, afternoon, evening. I'll catch y'all soon. Bye.